Victorian era was from 1837 to 1901, when Queen Victoria ruled. So here's some fast facts about the era.
In the 1860s, the Great Stink of London was so bad, Parliament thought about abandoning it. There was lots of reasons for the smell. The city was overcrowded with lots of people. There wasn't really much running water. There was no sanitation and there was very little plumbing. So the River Thames was full of waste from toilets, dead bodies and other gross things. Then there was a really hot summer, which meant the water evaporated and it left really smelly sludge all along the River Thames, creating the horrible smell.
It's such a long period of time, so there's lots of changes that happen, but one of the most significant was called the Industrial Revolution. There were ideas and inventions that were changing people's lives. You had things like the typewriter, the telephone, the bicycle, film, or machines and engines like these. But with these inventions came factories that the things needed to be made in. And those poor people working in the factories didn't work in very good conditions and they had an awful time.
It was common for people to wear black in the Victorian era. Queen Victoria wore black because she was in mourning after her husband died, but a lot of ordinary people wore black to hide all the dirt and filth because, as you can imagine, in the Victorian era there was lots of factories and chimneys that were full of soot and dirt, so if you're wearing black, you couldn't see the dirt. Very smart. During this time, the British Empire was the biggest it had ever been. 1/4 of the world's population lived in Queen Victoria's British Empire. Of course, we know now that people were treated very unfairly, and it did slowly begin to break down.
Having a roast on a Sunday became tradition in the Victorian times because most people only had Sundays off work, so that was their only chance to have a big meal all together. And poorer people could only afford meat once a week, so Sundays became the chosen day.
The first postal system was introduced in 1840. It was called the penny post, and you could buy postage stamps and send letters to people. Then, in 1843, when Christmas cards were created, you could buy a Christmas card and send it to your family.
At the start of the era, a lot of people couldn't read or write, but Victoria thought that education was important, so by the end of her rule, it was compulsory for children to go to school. They were a lot stricter than nowadays, though. As you can see, there's no whiteboard, it's just a blackboard. And they had different ways of making you behave, like a cane, or if you weren't sat up properly in your chair, this would be put behind your back. It's a bit difficult to do on myself, but you can imagine sitting at your school desk like this. It would sort you out.
In 1871, the Bank Holidays Act was created, which meant people had extra days off every year so they could actually have a holiday, which meant that travel agents started too.
Also in 1871 was the first rugby football union because organised sports were becoming more popular.
Have you heard of the saying, on tenterhooks? To be on tenterhooks is to feel nervous or on edge, and this actually came from the Victorian era. In the Victorian era, in factories they had long wooden hooks which they'd use to stretch out materials, and this is where the saying on tenterhooks comes from because being nervous feels like you're being stretched out.